Good evening, everyone. Adequate notice this meeting was provided by sending such notice to the Asbury Park Press, the Middletown Patch, and the Middletown Township Public School District website, and the posting of such notice at the August T. Minor administrative offices in each elementary, middle, and secondary school in the district.
Mrs. Caminiti.
Here.
Mr. Donlin.
Here.
Mrs. Farley. Mr. Heffernan.
Here.
Mr. Little.
Here.
Mrs. Minuis. Mrs. Wright.
Here.
Mrs. Tobacco. Mr. Capone.
Here. Please stand for the pledge. Thank you. Would you like me to hand the mic over to you now, Amy? Or?
Sure. So thank you, everybody, for coming. Tonight's meeting is focused on the 22-23 budget background. Each year before we get into the details of presenting our budget for the upcoming year, we do like to have what we call sort of an educational meeting to set the table for the budget that we're currently developing and to let people know the challenges and the factors that we're looking at that will impact our budget for next year. So I don't know, Chris, if we do have a presentation that's up on the screen, but with the lights on, we can't see it. This will be up on the website too after the meeting, so if anybody wants to refer to it, we'll be able to do so. Chris, want to go to the first slide? So our first slide is an important one to start with. It lays out the budget statement of priorities as laid out by the Department of Education. Just so everybody knows, each year we have to submit our budget after we develop it in the district to the Department of Education, the county office, to approve before we can actually adopt the budget. And within that document, besides the numbers and the budget figures that we put in, they also ask for several narratives for us to describe how we're addressing these various areas within our budget. So as we prepare for next year, we need to keep in mind that not only do we have to meet the requirements of what it takes to maintain our school system, but also talk about complying with standards and expanding opportunities for students relative to all the subject areas that we present here in the district. Chris, you can go to the front page. So just to recap the current year's budget, 21-22, we did have an increase in our general fund tax levy of 1.52%. That equated to additional revenue in the budget compared to the prior year of a little over $2.2 million. Our state aid for this current year was reduced by $1.2 million. And we also utilized funds from two of our reserves, our capital reserve and our maintenance reserve, in the amounts of approximately $1,600,000 and $693,000 to fund capital projects, eligible projects that were in our budget, and to offset maintenance expenses in our budget. The overall operating budget increase of our expenses, that doesn't include our capital expenses and anything spent with grants and so forth, was 2.1%. Okay, so we're going to talk about some of the key drivers of our upcoming budget. So our budget, as all of you know, or most hopefully you all know, is funded primarily by tax levy. In our district, tax levy is the primary source, and then we get some other sources of revenue, such as state aid and other revenues that we have. So our 21-22 general fund tax levy was $149,786,501. So we are capped at the amount of increase we can include in an upcoming budget at 2%. So taking 2% as being the maximum amount that we can raise the levy unless we have bank cap, which we'll talk about also shortly, we would be able to raise off of the current tax levy additional revenue for next year of $2,995,730. Now, because our budget did not include a tax levy of 2% last year, it was 1.52%. We also have available $714,389 of what they call banked tax levy cap, which, if needed, could be used in a future budget. It expires after 3 years, but the concept is if we're allowed to raise the tax levy 2%, if we don't do that in a given year, we are given 3 more years to add it back to the budget if we need to. Now, just to put this in perspective, and I'm going to be sprinkling in some of the state calculated information to give some color to this and explain, and we'll get into more about the state aid and so forth. When we get our state aid notice, they always tell us what our calculated local fair share tax levy is. As of last year, when we received our state aid, that number was $172,544,907. So you can see significantly higher than what our tax levy is now. Now, that's not a recommended funding amount. It's not a recommended tax levy. It's just what the state is saying that Middletown would be able to support based upon wealth and income and property value factors. So that is what is out there for the state, looking at our state aid calculations and seeing where our tax levy is compared to what they feel our community could raise. This number, that the local fair share number, does fluctuate based on those factors. And just to give you an idea of how much it can fluctuate, that number had increased as of last year by $4 million, but now for this year, it's decreased for $3.8 million. So it does go up and down based upon what those factors are. And again, our tax levy increases are capped at 2%, even if that local fair share is significantly higher than where we're at now. Tax levy. So some details on state aid, and we'll get into this for the next few slides. So based upon our projected 7-year impact of S2, and S2 is the legislation that was passed, I think about 4 years ago now, that set a formula for reducing some district state aid and increasing some district state aid. It was basically a redistribution of state aid based upon whether the districts were over or under adequacy and what their funding levels were. So based upon our projected impact of S2, we estimate a further reduction in state aid for 22-23 of about $1.1 million. Now that number is not going to be exact because we also get reductions or increases in our state aid based upon our enrollment. So we haven't been able to factor that in. We don't know the impact. We'll talk about the ASSA, our application for state school aid, in a couple of minutes. State aid funding is also impacted by the amount allocated for it in the state budget. So we get our state aid toward the end of February, and it does depend upon what's available to distribute to the districts in the budget. That can also cause fluctuation. And we don't ever get our state aid allocation until the governor gives his budget address at the end of February. So this chart here lays out what our reductions have been so far since the 18-19 year when S2 was enacted. So initially we lost, they called it 314,000, but in actuality, we were given an adjustment in July of 2018 after we had done our budget. We had to redo our budget that year and reduced our aid 1.1 million. They called the S2 adjustment 314,000, but unbelievably for 2018-19, when we did our budget, they had given us an increase in state aid when we did our budget. And then they turned around in July and not only took the S2 reduction of 314, but they also took back the other increase we had received of a little over 800,000. So we actually had to reduce our budget in July of that year after it was finalized by 1.1 million, almost $1.2 million. So in the subsequent years, we've per the S2 formula, 1920, 2021, 21, 22, we've lost an additional 552,000, 880,000. Last year, we lost, or for this current year, we lost 1.2 million. And so we're estimating for the remaining years of the implementation of S2, which is 3 more years, that it would be approximately another $1 million for 22, 23, and then lesser amounts for the 2 years out after that. But again, those numbers can change based upon our enrollments. So this graph shows what our state aid trend has been. And the reason we're using 2010-11 as the beginning year is because that's the year that when Governor Christie was in office, that the state enacted state aid cuts for everybody that brought our Middletown's state aid down from almost $21 million for the 2009-10 budget down to $13,741 for the 10-11 budget. And those of you who were around at that time remember what a big adjustment that was in 1 year. It was a $7 million reduction in state aid all in 1 year that the district had to account for. So after that drastic cut, as you can see, the line then starts trending upward again, and the district received additional state aid or increases in state aid for several years after that. Then when we reached the 2018 year, talked about with the implementation of S2, now our state aid has been back on the decline. So as we said, for next year, we're projecting another decrease, which would bring our state aid estimated amount for the 22-23 budget to $13,389,000. So at this point, that would bring it to less than what it was in 2010-11 after they made that 1 year drastic cut. So I just thought it was important to note that as of next year, we'll be back to where we were in 2010-11, and it's over 10 years later. So, and then we'll have additional decreases after that. By the end of the implementation of S2, we estimate that our state aid level will be down in the area of $12,500,000. So it will be down about another $1 million. We talked about the ASSA, the application for state school aid. And one of the driving factors of our state aid allocation is our enrollment. And they base it on resident enrollment. Resident enrollment is a little bit different than if you just take a look at some of the charts that we show sometimes that show the enrollment per school, because they factor in things such as shared time students, half-day pre-K. So there are some fluctuations between the actual students we have here and then the amount that they count for resident enrollment. But as you can see on this chart, we have been in a period of decreasing enrollment since 2012. So as of last year, or for the 2020 ASSA, we have resident enrollment of 9,053 students. For the 2021 October ASSA, we were down to a little over 8,900, a decrease of 119 students, 119.5 students. So it's done on a 3-year average. So if you take the average and it's a rolling average, you can see how that impact. In the beginning, we still had some of those 10,000 student numbers in there, but now we're reaching the point where we are now down, in a lower amount. So it's impacting our need. Next slide. So one of the things we talk about, it's a factor of state aid, is our adequacy budget. And I mentioned before, over adequacy, under adequacy. The district's adequacy budget is the state's calculation of what would be the necessary funding level to provide what is called a thorough and efficient education to every pupil in the district. So the adequacy budget is calculated by assigning weights and values for every student. There's various factors. It takes into account things like teachers' salaries, cost of supplies, inflation. It also is multiplied by what they call a geographic cost adjustment. So for Middletown, it's 0.99530. So it's a minimal adjustment, but there is a slight reduction in our in our budget based upon the geographic location within New Jersey. So the New Jersey DOE calculates whether you're over or above adequacy each year when it's part of the budget document, and it's also part of your state aid document that comes out. And at this point, for our 21-22 budget, the DOE had calculated that we were a little over $11 million over adequacy based upon their calculation of what our adequacy budget would be to provide a thorough and efficient education. Now, there's various reasons for that. One of the reasons it would be we would have additional initiatives that they don't consider in that calculations. We do things like a one-to-one Chromebook initiative. We have enhanced security. We have development of curricular pathways and partnerships with post-secondary institutions and our pathways here at the high schools that we run. We also have a larger number of schools compared to student enrollment, and that's another driving factor. We've talked about this in previous meetings where the state does have what they call model schools and the number of students that would be at each level, and all of our schools don't meet that benchmark. So essentially the way the state looks at us is that we have more schools than what we would need to house the amount of enrollment that we have. So that also factors into our costs, being a little bit higher than what they would consider in our adequacy budget. So when we talk about state aid, it's always in a lump number, 12 million, 13 million, 14 million. And we just thought it would be helpful to realize it's actually made up of several components. So if we take our 21-22 state aid, which is at the level of 14,532,000, and break it down into categories, it tells you that not all of it is driven specifically by our number of students or anything specific within the district. Some of it is based on just general metrics. For example, equalization aid. This one is an interesting one. This bucket of aid that we have has remained the same over the past few years. Equalization aid was actually intended to bridge the gap for under adequacy districts that cannot raise their local cost share support by tax levy without exceeding their 2% property tax cap. So as we just spoke, Middletown is over adequacy. So theoretically, this aid would apply to us, but it's remained in place over the past few years. At some point, the state may look at this and say this is not something that Middletown would be entitled to. They may leave it. Some of it depends upon what funds are available, but that number seems to be stagnant for the last few years. But what we did experience was maybe 8-9 years ago, somewhere along that time frame, that number used to be about $3 million. And as they were preparing, I think, to enact this S2, a lot of that money got shifted into the bottom bucket, which we'll talk about adjustment aid, so that equalization was brought down to where it is now. So that sort of just stays there, and we'll see, what the state does with that in the future. Transportation aid, that's a categorical aid that's dedicated and based on transportation. We do file a report every year called the DRTRS, which is a report to the state on how many routes we run and how many students we're transporting, all the particulars about transportation. And so based on that, they will look at two baselines. They have different costs for regular ed students and special ed students, and they come up with a formula. And our transportation aid, which also has remained the same for the past at least 3 or 4 years, so it doesn't seem to be actually fluctuating with our changes in our report, but it's $3.1 million. Special education aid, now this does not include extraordinary aid, which is another bucket of aid that we'll talk about shortly. For this year, it was a little over $7 million. What's interesting about special education aid is it's not based on your actual number of students. It's calculated using an assumed classification rate, which means the percentage of your students in district that are classified or have an IEP, that are special education, receiving special education services. They calculate it based on an assumed rate of 15.4%. Well, Middletown's current rate is 19.7 or almost 20%. So right there, we're not getting credit for the additional students we have over the 15.4. Conversely, there could be districts that don't have 15, they might have a lesser percentage, but this is a blanket percentage that they contribute to everyone, every district. So again, it doesn't necessarily follow your student enrollment. It's calculated based on a blanket metric. Security aid, we're currently receiving 861,000. That is actually calculated with a baseline cost per pupil. It's not a blanket percentage. They also do give additional amounts for at-risk students, the students who are considered at risk in your district. So again, that number has not changed really over the last few years. And even though our student enrollments have changed, again, all this is also predicated on how much aid is available. So if they calculate that we are entitled to, say, $1 million in security aid, you don't have a budget to fund a lesser amount, you're going to receive less. But that's technically how they calculate. Adjustment aid is the last bucket, and that's commonly known as hold harmless aid. It was created back in 2008, and the original intent of that was to ensure when they enacted another funding reconfiguration called the SFRA, that no district would lose funding at that time. So they reran the funding formula, but they wanted to make sure districts weren't losing funding. That was in 2008. Now we all know in 2009-10, we did end up losing a lot of funding. But right now, the S2 reductions that we've been experiencing, that's been coming out of this adjustment aid amount. So every year, this 2.5 million, it's going to get lower and lower until it's down to not much of an amount at all. So that gives you an idea. Even though we talk about state aid in one bucket, it really is made up of several components that are activated. So the other aid we mentioned in the area of special education is extraordinary aid. That is not something that we receive every February with our state aid notice. That's a separate application and a separate award. So the way extraordinary aid works is the district accumulates all of the expenses that they have that will qualify for this aid. And this aid was designated for special education students that need a high level of services. So the state sets thresholds for what would be considered excessive costs for services provided in district. It would be anything over $40,000 per student. For out of district or students in private placements, it's anything over $55,000 for students. So the state, the way this is structured, can reimburse up to 90% of those costs for services provided in district and 75% if they are provided out of district. However, what actually happens is it's, again, dependent upon the funding that's available in the state budget. So between 2015 and 2020, we received extraordinary aid that really ranged between 50 and 59% of the costs that we submitted that were eligible for this extraordinary aid. Last year, we did receive an increase in extraordinary aid. We received $2 million, almost $2.5 million. Normally, our award would run 1.4, 1.5, 1.6 million. We did get more last year. And if you look at that award based upon the costs that we submitted that were eligible, it represented 75% of our eligible costs. But again, this is not something that's guaranteed every year. You don't know what it's going to be when you do your budget either. So the district doesn't even receive its extraordinary aid award for each fiscal year until after the year is ended. So just to give you an idea, we're doing the 2023 budget now. We're not going to know what that aid is when we do the budget. We're going to start our fiscal year in July. We're going to go all the way through June of 23. In July of 23 is when we'll find out what our extraordinary aid is going to be for next year. So again, it's hard to, we do budget an amount for it, but you really don't know what it's going to be. And you don't even get it during the year so that you could plan to do anything if you got a significant increase. You really can't plan with it. If it's lower than what you budgeted, then you're faced with that as well. So excess surplus. That's another source of revenue that we sometimes have to use. We had, over the past several years, structured the budget so it would eliminate the reliance on excess surplus. When I started here around 2000, in 2010, the district was using regularly a few $1 million of excess surplus to support the budget. But as a district, we made the strategic decision to eliminate that from our budget because it's not guaranteed. Excess surplus is any additional funds over the allowable level of our fund balance that remains at the end of each fiscal year. So as you can, surmise, you don't know all the time, how much things happen during the year that impact the budget, that you may have more funds available or less funds available. So if you do have excess surplus, though, that's over the amount of your fund balance that you can retain, it is required to be utilized in the next budget as revenue. But for the last couple of years, as we've talked about in other meetings, we have had some unanticipated savings in our budgets because of the impact of the pandemic. There's been costs that we haven't incurred, primarily things like transportation. We have had some decrease even in personnel costs if we've had personnel on leaves and so forth because of benefits or other reasons. We've had various things that we haven't been able to run, programs we haven't been able to run, things like that. So we did realize some savings. So as a result of last year, the 2021 fiscal year, we generated about $400,000 in excess surplus that we will now use as a revenue. But that's the way it's structured. And we'll use that in our budget. So another source of revenue that we talked about to support our budget are our reserves, and we use those from time to time to support things. Our capital budget we've used pretty regularly to fund projects within the budget. We've tried to be pretty strategic in putting money into capital reserve each year when we can, and then taking it out to fund things so that we keep reinvesting in the district and getting things done that we can't necessarily fund out of our regular operating budget. Our maintenance reserve, we established that. We first started that around 2013. We deposited money in there, and that's been something that we have taken withdrawals from when we have things that come around that we haven't budgeted for, that are unexpected, major repairs, things of that nature. We did use some of it last year to support our operating budget, and that is definitely allowable. If you feel that you have money reserved to reduce the cost of your maintenance costs in a budget, you can do that. So what we have available for right now for next year, or the budget we're working on now, is lined up here. We have about $2.2 million in our capital reserve and $569,000 in our maintenance reserve, for a total of $2.7 million. So we get asked the question, what's the maximum amount or how much you're allowed to have in reserves? So for your capital reserve, you are allowed to have in reserve a reserve that would be large enough to fund your long-range facilities plan. And that's a plan that we talked about at meetings where you lay out the 5 years of capital needs in the district for the buildings and so forth. And our capital or our long-range facility plan total at this point is approximately $105 million. So being that we have $2.2 million, I think we're okay as far as I can see. The maintenance reserve is based upon a percentage of your expected amount that you would have to invest in your budget. And our maximum maintenance reserve at this point is $7.7 million. So again, we're underneath that cap as well. We did make deposits. The board made deposits to our reserve accounts in June of 2021 of $1.5 million for capital and $1 million for maintenance. So that's included in these balances for June 30, 2021. And so we then made withdrawals for the amounts that we budgeted for to use this year, and that's how we get our balance at this point. Another major driver of our budget are salaries. This is a people-centric organization. Teachers are our primary component of our workforce, but we have everybody else that supports the operation, facilities and support staff, paraprofessionals, and everybody that we have on staff. So currently, salaries represent approximately $105 million out of our $171 million general fund, or what we call our operating budget, or 61%. That percentage is consistent with prior years. It has not fluctuated in any significant manner. We also, when we're doing our budget, have to take into account where we stand. We have 4 bargaining units within the district. We have the MTPS, which is our teachers and support staff. We have 2 Teamsters units, facilities, and also paraprofessionals. And we also have our MTAA, which is our administrators. So for this year, 3 of these contracts are going to be expiring on June 30th, 2022. And at this point, we do not have successor contracts for 22-23. The MTAA contract doesn't expire until June 30th. So we have to take this all into account for next year's budget. We may not have a successor contract by the time we finalize our budget. So that's, again, a variable that we're going to have to do. So we're looking at our enrollments and schedules and other identified needs that will impact our staff for next year as well. Those of you who have sat through previous budget presentations, you'll see each year sometimes new positions are proposed to meet needs that we have here in the district. Sometimes we're able to eliminate positions, and we primarily do that through attrition. We have retirements, and we have the ability to reduce staff, then we reduce staff. But we're, like I said, we're in the process of looking all that year, what our schedules look like, and so that's ongoing. Another major driver of the budget is benefits. So health benefits budgeted for 21-22, and this would be net of employee contributions. All of our employees contribute toward their health insurance. The net costs, or the net budgeted amount, was $23.4 million. So that represents approximately 14% of our operating. We did transition as a district to a self-insured health insurance platform on September 1st of this year. So our early budget projections for next year indicate that there may be an approximately 4% reduction, around $1 million, for what we need to budget for next year compared to this year, because the claims that we've been experiencing and the trend right now has been favorable. But we're going to continue to monitor that. That's not a final budget estimate. We're working closely with our broker to come up with refined projections as we get closer to when we have to finalize the budget. Another variable that we've dealt with over the past 2 budget cycles are that employees continue to migrate through election and attrition to the New Jersey Educators Health Plan. That's the plan that was established by the state, that all educators, all new staff for the public schools have to go into. They're not going to have a choice anymore to come join the district now. You have to go into the New Jersey Educators Health Plan. It's also offered to all of our staff. But we've had a significant amount of our staff migrate to that plan. At this point, out of our 919 covered employees in the district that would take our insurance, that would be just the employees. We have one insurance dependents and so forth. Out of those 919, 480 of them are in this New Jersey Educators Health Plan. So that's about 52%. It did change. The New Jersey Educators Health Plan changed contribution requirements for employees, based on premium costs to be based on salary. So there's a sliding salary percentage scale based upon the earnings that employees contribute to the plan. But it does represent savings for the employees. Less than they would have under the traditional former Chapter 78 structure in most cases. So we have seen a reduction in the contributions based on that. And then also there's another plan out there that we're going to be looking at, states mandating that we implement called the North State Educators Health Plan. And that will be a plan that's focused, the network will be New Jersey based, so it doesn't give our employees a lot of options for their network, and the contributions will be lower. We don't know what the appetite for that plan is. That's something else we're going to have to implement. So one of the other things about the New Jersey Educators Health Plan, while it's required now for all new employees and we have people migrating into it, we can't change the plan design. So in prior years, one of the things that districts could do to impact the health benefit costs would be to increase co-pays, increase deductibles, change some of the services that were covered. You don't have the option to do that in this plan. It's a state design plan, and you don't have the option to make changes. So it sort of ties the district's hands as far as working with that. But again, more than the district has been looking at options to reduce our costs, and so far the self-insurance, although it's very new right now, seems to be benefiting us. Another major area of our budget is transportation. Transport thousands of students every day on our buses, and it is a significant part of our budget. For 2021, 2022, our budget for contracted services, the busing contracts, is almost $11 million. Our transportation aid that we receive, as we looked at on our previous slide, is $3.1 million. So most of the cost, the majority of the cost, is borne directly by the district. Our state aid only supports about 30% of what the transportation costs are. So here we have broken down categories of the students that we transport. We have our regular education, special education district. We have a small amount of our students are going out of district for special education. And so 88% of our total students that we transport are for in-district, regular and special education, and are out of district special education students. The remaining 12% are 2% that get transported to our full-day vocational academies, the county academies such as MAST and Allied Communications. We have a number of students going there. And then we are also responsible for transporting the non-public students, so students that attend non-public schools that live in Middletown. If the schools are within close mileage to the, I think it's 20 miles of the district, then we are required to transport them if we get the routes. And that actually represents 10% of all the students that we so in total, we transport 5,685 students every day. So the next couple of slides present our school building information. We've shown this before, but we think it's worth re-emphasizing. When we talk about our facilities and our maintenance budget and our capital projects and maintaining our buildings, we want everybody to be aware that if you look at our elementary schools, we've listed these elementary schools in order of when they were built. So we did include Port Monmouth here just because even though we're not operating as a school, we still have it as a building. And so we still are responsible for Port Monmouth. But our newest building, or our newest elementary school, is New Monmouth, which was built in 1968. And then you can see the years go all the way back down to River Plaza, which we have that's being built is in 1922. So the average age of our facilities, and we'll go over the secondary schools, at this point is 74 years old. So the next slide shows secondary schools. And we have Bayshore, Thompson, Thorne, High School North and High School South, Bay Shore was actually built originally in 1931. Thompson and Thorne, which were built at the same time in 1960. And we have High School North that was built in 1952 and High School South in 1974. So High School South is actually the newest building in the entire district, being built in 1974. And again, that is almost 50 years ago. So the last renovation referendum that we did was in 2002, which was 20 years ago. And it only included the middle and high school. So that referendum did not include the elementary. So this law is important for everybody to know this because, again, as we keep talking about increased maintenance costs and so forth, our buildings are. So debt service for 22-23. That's a separate part of our budget, and it's actually a separate tax levy and separate state aid award. So at this point, we have 3 different bond issues that are outstanding. We have refunding bonds that we did in 2020 that we just actually refinanced. They were refinanced at a savings of over $3 million over the remaining life of the bonds, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But they mature in 2027, and right now we're paying $4.1 million in principal and interest for next year that we have to budget for. We also have our 2013 refunding bonds. They refunded a prior issue. We have principal and interest due on those bonds of $766,000 next year. Those bonds will mature in 2027 also. And then we have our 2014 bond issue. That is the most recent bonds that were issued. They were issued specifically to match ROD grants that we received. Back in 2013-14, the district received about $19 million in ROD grants, and we issued bonds to fund the matching part of that to do those projects. So right now, for next year, our payment on those bonds is $1,579,000, and those will mature in 2029. So our total debt service for next year is about $6.5 million. For the projects that were not funded with ROD grants, that we didn't receive that state money for, the state picks up 40% of our debt service in the form of state aid. So the tax levy will pay the remaining 60%. And that tax levy is not something that there is any choice on each year. When the referendum is passed by the town for the bonds to be issued, the town becomes legally obligated to support those bond payments for the tax levy. So that's non-negotiable each year. Tax levy is whatever we need to fund these bond payments minus the amount of state aid that we receive. So if we go to the next slide. We wanted to give you some perspective about where our debt has trended, or what kind of balances that we've had over the past 10 years or so. So I took this from 2011 to 2022. The significance of 2011 only is because of the first budget that I was working on, but it does give you a good period of time. So as of the end of this fiscal year, after we make our bond payments, we actually did just make our bond payments February 1st, we will have an outstanding principal balance on all of our bonds of $37,145,000. In 2011, when I started with the district, at the end of that fiscal year, we had $64 million in bonds outstanding. So we've paid down. What we issued $11,510,000 in bonds for the ROD grants, but we've paid down almost $40 million in debt since 2011. So those balances have significantly increased. The column to the right before the year of issue shows the original amount to the issue. So for these refunding bonds that say Series 2020, they were originally issued in 1997. It was $78 million in bonds, and that was a major referendum that the township did for improvements to the schools. Then another bond issue, another referendum was done in 2002 in the amount of $10,500,000. And those were improvements to the secondary schools at that time. So we have, and then we have the broad grant issue that we issued in 2014. The original amount of that issue was $19 million, and we're down to dollars in a balance there. So aside from the matching funds that we did for the $19 million of broad grants that the district received, the district has not issued any new debt in 20 years. The 1997 and the 2002 issues, like I said, have both been refinanced, and we've been doing that to lock in lower interest rates. And so we've been able to reduce the amount of interest that we're paying on those bonds through the life of those bonds without extending the maturities. So our last slide is a timeline for the budget. We have been meeting again as a central office administrative team with our school and department level administrators to review needs that have been submitted. We are focusing on staffing and student scheduling as well as other district-wide budget initiatives. Our tentative budget for 22-23 must be submitted to the Department of Ed and approved by the board by Monday, March 21st. So our tentative budget is anticipated to be approved by the board at our March workshop, which will make a special voting meeting. And the public hearing and adoption of the final budget must be done between Monday, April 25th and Monday, May 9th. So the board anticipates holding the public hearing for the budget and the final budget at its April voting. Before that time, we will be reviewing additional detailed budget information on next year's budget at our workshop meeting, and we will also be presenting the tentative budget when we have it up for the board to approve in March. And we normally do schedule, I would anticipate, one other budget meeting for the public after our workshop in February to go over more details of the budget. The board also reviews these areas in their various committees, so that process is on. Looking at the facilities and technology and curriculum, but again, as we recapped in this presentation, really the lion's share of the budget is made up of the areas of salaries, benefits, transportation, and facilities. And so things like our school budgets and other areas, they don't make up as much percentage of the budget as the areas that we're talking about tonight. So there are still a lot of variables, but we do make our best estimates at that time. Another thing to keep in mind is we do this budget in March, say 2022. That budget has to take us through June of 2023. So the budget, while it's an important guiding tool to how funds are going to be allocated for next year, it's also a plan. And sometimes we do have to make changes to the plan during the year if something comes across, such as a pandemic, something like that would change your scope of what your operations are. And we do have the ability to make those changes. We shift funds if we need to up to a certain point. See things that are costing more than we had anticipated. We have the ability to adjust expenses in other areas. So again, I do stress that it's a plan. We make our best plan that we can, but it's 15 months before the budget goes. There's also things that happen beyond sometimes. So we really meant this as an educational meeting to let you know all of the factors that we're looking at as we develop next year's budget, and to give you a better understanding of the funding sources that we have and what makes up state aid and how that's calculated, tax levy that we have available to us. And although raising the tax levy, if you look at the 2% by 2.9, almost $3 million, that does sound like a lot of money, but $74 million budget, that's and there's going to be a lot of cost movement in there that makes it difficult to see your expenses. So that's work on that. So those are all the slides. That's a lot of information, but some of you that have not heard this before, some of you have heard some of this before. Some, so, just want to have a better understanding of the details of the budget and the upcoming, all this other background.
Thank you, Amy.
So at this time, I guess if the board has any questions, and then we'll open it up to public comment as well.
Any questions, anyone?
Sure. We actually see the budget.
What's that?
When we actually see the budget.
Well, as I said, we're going to be reviewing information in committees, but at the next workshop meeting, we will have.
Next workshop, so we'll breakout.
We'll have preliminary breakouts. Yes.
Yes, fine.
I see that the enrollment is dropping. Tenure projections.
We do. We have had a few demographic studies done over the past few years. The most recent one was in 2020. We are working right now on having that updated so that we can see they do a 5-year projection. They also do a 10-year projection, but if you talk to the demographers, they'll tell you that anything beyond 5 years, it's not that it's totally off the charts, but they do not place as much faith in that and in the accuracy of that after 5 years. So we did have our last update done in 2020 before the pandemic really started to impact our enrollment. So that's why at this point to update it for new developments in town, impacts of the pandemic. We also monitor it within the district. We can see by the kindergarten enrollments that are happening for next year, what the trend is as far as students coming in and coming back into the district, or even if there's movement for students that may have gone to private schools during the district. It's like they're looking to move back into the district. That's definitely something we monitor ourselves, and we also have demographers look at periodically. That would be a change in the state aid, but more, well, it's not so mysterious because they do tell you how to calculate that. It have to be something that would have to be achieved right at the state level. So it is something that we have mentioned. We've talked to legislators. We have noted that, particularly in our district, we're losing credit for 5%, getting credit for between 4 and 5% of our students.
I mean, it was a couple years ago that we actually did some extra advocacy, like when Dr. George was here on that particular issue. And honestly, I think it's something that we should continue to do this because that is a huge distance in terms of the amount of funding that we need to give those students the actual services that they need. And that would be a great savings to actually get that up. So I do think it's something that the legislative committee should look at.
We're now open the microphone up for public comment. Anybody wishes to make a comment, please step forward. State your name and address.
Well, I just want to clarify that it's a state plan design. And some districts do participate actively in the state health benefit. We are still considered a private plan. All of our employees are covered under they're not part of the state health benefits plan, they're part of our private plan. You're self-funding all of our employees. So if they're still, exactly. But we can't change it. No, I just wanted to make that clear.
Thank you. Anyone else to speak? Just state your name and address.
It was all over. Garden State Pathway, Garden State Parkway. Our children would have to walk through piles of snow that were shoved onto the road by the school bus. Nothing that we were promised by you, by the township, was taken care of that day. We were told none of this would be a problem. And here I am again, telling you, this is a problem. It's not being addressed. We want this problem solved. We want safe route for our children to get to school. River Plaza is getting so much positive press about a safe route to school. You have the rest of your students going to South in those conditions. We want this problem.
Thank you. Would anybody else wish to make a public comment? Okay. I'm going to move forward to speak about the calendar, Amy.
If you want to do that now, Mr. Capone, you
Yes.
can do that.
Just put a couple more dates on the schedule. We have a couple of days that are available in March. Your budget is due by the 15th, right, Amy?
The budget's actually due
Oh, the
on the
21st. I'm sorry.
21st.
All right, so would the 15th work for everyone if we did a meeting for the 15th and the 21st or the 24th? March, we're talking about March, yes. We have February. March 15th. 2 days.
Oh,
So we have to do the workshop, obviously, and we're going to speak about the budget.
If it doesn't make a difference to the board, the 24th would probably work better if we have it on the 15th and the 24th, only because if we're trying to do our budget submission by the 21st, and if there's anything
Okay.
going on there.
Tuesday, the 15th, and it'll be Thursday, the 24th. Correct. Yes,
When
sure.
are we having board meetings?
I'm sorry.
Those are the budget meetings.
No, those
No,
are the
no.
board meetings.
The
Board meetings.
15th and the 24th, we're having
Yes.
a board meeting on the Thursday?
Well, the library's not
Thursday,
available on the
Tuesday.
Wednesday.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Right, we're going based upon the availability. Right.
March
And 24th.
15th and
Correct.
Correct.
Yes. And going into April, we have that Easter break that we're offering, the 12th or the 13th. Does that work for everyone?
12th and 13th,
12th or the 13th?
For the workshop meeting.
Yes.
either one is fine.
One,
Why not stay with the 12th? Because they
Sure.
can send it on Tuesday.
Yep. So we'll do Tuesday, the 12th, Amy?
Tuesday, the 12th?
Yep.
Okay.
Now, the next availability would be the 25th, which is Monday, or the 27th, which is Wednesday. You don't want to do 2 meetings in April? We're going to do the workshop on the 12th, and we're going to do a voting meeting on the 25th or 27th.
Well, you're going to need the second meeting.
No, I didn't hear that. That's
Yes.
why I'm
Right.
asking.
Mhm.
I'm not getting. I was trying.
The 27th would probably be better than the
27th, probably
25th.
better, yes.
And that would also be our public hearing on our budget.
Good.
Right, so
The 12th will be the
April
workshop,
12th
the
and April
27th will be the
27th.
voting meeting, yes. You good, Mike?
He's not here the 27th. He's
Are
here
you away on the
25th.
27th? Okay.
Is it 25th?
The 25th is the Monday coming back from vacation, if that works with everybody.
that's probably going to be tough. We could use a couple of days for even to put additional bills on the bill list, and it's just going to be tough to do that.
So if we can, Mike, let's leave for the 27th right now. Let's see if we could. That's okay? Because the 26th isn't available, but. Want to do one more month? You want to do May? May the 17th, would that work for everyone? And the 25th?
So what are we doing sort of, some months we're doing 2 weeks apart?
Well, you have the Easter break in April.
Okay, so that's what I did there, right?
That's
Right,
why.
that's the only reason for that.
And then in May, we can do the 17th and the 25th, if that will work with everyone. Yes.
Oh, my-
I just
Mrs.
looked at
Walker,
you.
that the 17th, we need something before the 15th.
Yeah.
You have to do the rehire, right? Yeah.
So you,
before the
That's right.
15th.
so we have the 12th, which is Thursday, or the 11th, which is Wednesday. We have the 11th Wednesday, or 12th is Thursday. Any day.
It's the 12th.
No, it's still May.
All right, let's go with the 12th, which is a Thursday.
So we're not gonna do the
Okay,
17th?
17th,
No.
no.
I can't do the 12th because I'm traveling for work.
Is the 11th work with you?
I
or
could do the 11th. I can't do the 12th.
Does 11th work with everyone? Good, so we'll go with the 11th. So Wednesday, 11th, and Wednesday, the 25th. Yes. And June, I would think the 14th might work best before all the graduations and all. Does everybody agree with that? Good. Good. So let's leave it at June the 14th. That's good.
Did you want to make that a combination workshop voting meeting?
Yes.
June 14th? Okay.
Frank, just looking at the calendar for March, I know you said March 24th.
Yes,
I think the Friends of Diverse Learners have a presentation that night. I don't know if that interferes with us, but I think it's March 24th. So it's dyslexia, right?
Yes.
So I don't know if we want to, just something to think about.
We have the 15th, which is a workshop and for the budget, it's special voting meeting. We can do the 15th and 21st. Would that work, Amy, too, or? I mean,
The
or we can go this,
21st.
or we can go 2 weeks away, go to the 28th or 29th.
Oh, we could do that too.
Would work with you, Mike? Yeah.
28th or 29th.
The 28th or 29th, or the 21st, but the 21st is.
Yeah, I was just pointing it out if we have to, if we have to do it that day.
Yeah.
I'm just pointing out, I'm just looking at my calendar.
Let's go with the 29th. Does that work with everyone? 29th? No, I'm in March. I'm sorry. March, yes. John did that on everyone, so blame him.
I waited. I was gonna wait till like August.
He waited till we went all the way through it. Nothing to the 30th. You just take it March 15th and you go in the 15th and the 29th in March.
What's that?
Mike's got like
Right.
30 meetings on his
I-
calendar, on his
we-
phone
we-
calendar right now. He's like, yeah, every week. He's like, is it today?
We will send this out, but I'm
Yes.
just I'm going to go through the dates to confirm.
Just
March
to re-
15th, March 29th, April 12th, April 27th, May 11th, May 25th, and June 14th.
Correct. Good.
Are we gonna go into July? Are we gonna do the rest of the year?
Not tonight. Unfortunately, Amy gave me half a calendar, so no, not tonight.
Oh, I mean, like, we're hoping we can get back.
Yes, that is correct. Okay.
And then we have our free days. Okay.
Yes.
You say so.
Anything else to discuss? Need a motion to adjourn?
Did you want to
So
say
moved.
seconds?
Second, yeah.
Yes.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.